Good morning, Honorable Minister, Petroleum and Natural Gas, Shri Dharmendra Pradhanji, Vice Chairman, Niti Aayog, Dr. Arvind Panagria, Founding Director, Center of Global Energy Policy, Columbia University, Professor Jason Bordoff, CEO, Niti Aayog, Mr. Amitabh Kant. Good morning and welcome to today's Global Energy Dialogue on India and Natural Gas. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you on my personal behalf and on behalf of the Confederation of Indian Industry to this day-long session where diverse stakeholders will engage on some crucial aspects around building a natural gas-based economy. Christian, the Global Energy Dialogue, India and Natural Gas, the joining together of plentiful supply with promising demand. This is a unique collaboration of academia, policymaker, and industry, and is hopefully the beginning of a new collaboration. This comes at an opportune time for India as we brace ourselves for the challenging dynamics of the global natural gas industry. India is moving beyond the debate, as you all know, to move towards a gas-based economy over the next few years. Over the past 2 years, the Government of India, under the leadership of Minister Pradhan, has taken positive steps across the value chain, including renegotiation of LNG import contracts, gas price reforms, hydrocarbon exploration licensing policy, the new policy, and a revolutionary initiative of an East Coast hub with pipeline networks crisscrossing eastern India. These are all significant reforms towards developing the gas sector. At CII, India's largest association that represents members which culminately account for 65% of India's GDP, hydrocarbons and in particular natural gas has been a focus area over the last few years. We believe India needs to ramp up gas demand to at least 15% in the medium term and to the 24% eventually to transition to a clean fuel and low carbon world. In doing this, India will fully integrate and tap into the global gas market and develop a gas ecosystem that provides access, availability, as well as affordability of sustainable supply. There is a business and societal case for increasing natural gas in the energy mix in India. And you'll hear about this throughout the day. I'm confident that the deliberation today will throw up interesting ideas to debate and build upon. Now, before we start the deliberation, let me ask Professor Jason to say a few words from Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being here. I want to thank Niti Aayog and CII for their joint partnership and sponsorship in this event, to Amitabh Kant and Dr. Arvind Panagria, my colleague from Columbia University, and Anil Jain, and all the staff at Niti Aayog and CII for putting this together. Sashi, thank you very much. I want to thank the Honorable Minister for joining us this morning as well. The Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University is one of the world's leading research institutes for looking at issues at the intersection of energy policy, energy markets, geopolitics, and the environment. We have several global centers for Columbia University around the world, including one here in India, and it's really a pleasure to be back and to be focusing on this incredibly important topic of the outlook for India's energy markets and the role that natural gas can play in that. I think it's a really timely moment to be having this conversation too, given how the global gas market is changing. It's hard to remember that there was a point in history where gas was considered a waste fuel. The sort of adage in the industry was find gas once, you're forgiven, find it twice, you're fired. People didn't really know what to do with natural gas because it was hard to transport and perceived to have little value. Now the world's biggest oil and gas companies are sharply shifting their portfolio focus to be heavier on gas. Oil and gas companies, in some cases, are becoming gas and oil companies. And that is important when we think about the energy outlook for the world, but certainly for India. Natural gas is projected to be the fastest rising fossil fuel moving forward. Its share in the global energy mix through 2040, the IEA, Tim Gould is here, tells us will rise through 2040. And India is set to be a key driver of that increase in global demand for natural gas, which we know emits less carbon than coal and far less local pollution. And we're reminded if we walk outside today about how important that is. Global gas markets are in the midst of a profound transformation, a sharp rise in global gas trade over the next several years, led by the United States and Australia, first and foremost, are allowing more competition, diversity of supply, changing the way that natural gas is priced in the global market. And the shale revolution in the U.S., as we're seeing from exports, flexible on their destination, indexed to Henry Hub prices, is not only changing the face of energy in the U.S., but changing the global energy picture too. And I'm going to talk more about that in my remarks a little bit later. I'll say I was struck by the conversations I've had over the last several days, not only on how important what's happening in the U.S. is here today is here to India, but many of my conversations made me think back to the history we've had in the United States with natural gas, where throughout the 1970s, the United States had price controls in place and an allocation system for natural gas. That might sound familiar. The idea was to keep prices affordable, but the result was by the 1960s, natural gas supply was running low, and it was difficult for producers to keep up with demand. Price controls in the 1970s only applied to interstate sales, so the price of gas sold within a single state ended up being 2 to 4 times higher than the price of gas that was sold across state lines. So you could see how price controls and allocation system created market distortions in the U.S. in the 60s and 70s that were deeply damaging. And then President Nixon called for decontrolling gas prices in 1973. That was not a politically popular move. But by the time President Carter took office in 1977, the nation was facing severe gas shortages. Congress put in place emergency measures to give the president vast allocation powers over the gas supply, and then President Carter proposed a very complex system that led to old gas prices, new gas prices, new gas prices. Some of this might sound a little bit familiar. And then only gradually were gas prices deregulated over the span of a decade, and that allowed for markets to work. It allowed for markets to determine supply and demand for gas, and then it allowed price signals to incentivize new investment in upstream production, which eventually, decades later, created the kind of incentives that allowed innovative pioneers like George Mitchell, along with other factors like private ownership of the mineral rights, to go and experiment and through trial and error discover how to make shale production economic. So that experience of letting markets work and the benefits of well-functioning markets, I think, is relevant when we think about the outlook for natural gas markets around the world, and certainly some of the experience that you've had here in India recently. And from the role of natural gas in determining supply and demand, to the role of gas in a low-carbon economy, to the role of gas trade in our global markets, those are the kinds of issues we look at in the Global Gas Research Program that we have at Columbia University. That's led by Tim Bursma, who's up against the wall in the back there, and I want to thank him for all the work he did to put this workshop together today as well. Antoine Haft, Tatiana Mitrova, my colleague Vijay Modi from Columbia. I just want to acknowledge the other people from Columbia that are here. One of our advisory board members at Columbia, Martin Houston, thank you for joining us as well. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be with us. This is just the start of a significant commitment that we in New York at Columbia have made, both to studying the global gas market and to deepening our engagement here in India, and we look forward to future collaboration. Thank you again for coming.
Jason, thank you for that introduction. To start the deliberations today, I thought it's important to get someone who is known to be thinking always out of the box, and someone who can think big. It's our CEO of National Institute of Transforming India, or Niti Aayog, Mr. Amitabh Kant. I thought there's nobody better than him to set the stage and the context and tell us how big we should be thinking as we think gas for India. So, Mr. Kant.
Honorable Minister, Mr. Pradhan, the Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, Dr. Arvind Panagaria, Mr. Jason Bodov, Shashi, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be in the midst of all of you at this global energy dialogue. To my mind, there's no doubt in the minds of all energy stakeholders, whether it be government, whether it be industry, that India needs to ramp up the share of gas in its energy mix. We had a mere 6% gas share in the primary energy mix, when the global average is 24%. Gas is the preferred fuel over all other fossil fuels. It is cleaner, it is easier to handle, and now even cheaper than oil. Actually, our efforts in India to ramp up the share of gas started very, very early. Besides gas supplies from Bombay High in late 70s, when I was still growing up, I was in school. In fact, India received its first LNG cargo in 2004, even before the Chinese did. But then as LNG prices rose, India became extremely inward-looking and depended upon domestic supplies. What India needs today is an agnostic view towards gas regardless of source, be it domestic or imported LNG. If we can absorb oil supplies to the tune of 80% of our oil requirements at international prices, there is no reason to my mind why we cannot absorb LNG at the going prices. And this brings us to the question why we have so far not been able to absorb LNG in large volumes. If you look at it from the first cargo in 2004, in 12 years, our LNG imports have risen merely to 16 million tons in financial year 2016, whereas China has already crossed 20 million tons 2 years earlier in 2014. China has also received large imported supplies of gas by pipelines from Turkmenistan, from Myanmar. And therefore, my view is that experts must examine how India can absorb more imported gas supplies while our domestic production is poised to increase. We cannot remain captive to it. Our companies have struck contracts in East Asia, Africa, and US, and these supplies will come as LNG. Our markets must be able to internationalize these supplies. My view is that without gas, we cannot shift to CNG in transport sector, or PNG in our homes so that LPG can be spared for rural poor. We also need gas to revive our closed urea plants as well as power plants, and this is something which is in the offing. Government has put high priority on this. And these are all stranded. These are all plants that are stranded for gas. There is a large nascent gas demand which is brought to our markets, will spur investment in terminals, in pipelines, and gas-consuming industry. And, to support this right now, there is a present softening of LNG prices. We are growing at about 7.6%. This is the fastest rate in the world of any economy, but the challenge is to make India grow at 9 to 10% and do it over a long period on a consistent basis over a 3-decade period so that we can lift a very young population above the poverty line. And to my mind, there's no better opportunity than the present times. This is the moment, and we must seize this moment to make the investments, make the transitions, and transform the energy sector. You have a dynamic government, you have a very, very forward-looking minister, and if we can't transform this sector now, we'll never be able to do this. And therefore, we are really looking forward to a very, very high-quality discussion and robust recommendation coming out of today's event. We are delighted that some of the top energy experts from different parts of the world are present today. The Center for Global Energy Policy of Columbia University is a world-renowned center, And I would personally welcome Jason Bordoff and his team who have worked very closely with Niti Aayog to put this together. I'm also delighted that experts from Oxford Institute of Energy Study, Institute of Energy Economics, Japan, and many renowned experts are here. And I'm particularly delighted that the Honorable Minister for Petroleum is taking the lead. He's a very progressive, forward-looking minister, and therefore we should bring in radical, transformational changes. We must seize this moment. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Panagaria, who's been able to bring in a completely new direction to policy making in India. He's a person whose vast knowledge in economics is greatly needed for policy making, and I'm sure that today's interaction and discussion will greatly benefit from his perspective. I wish this conference all success. We would in Niti Aayog look forward to the recommendations, and we look forward to implementing this with full determination and with all aggressiveness that is required from the government side. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Kant. I told you he's a man who doesn't shy of thinking large and thinking big. And India needs people like him to think big so that we can be part of it and create it. Some of the quick things he said. He talked about how India started the gas race first, but somehow we have fallen behind. China has gone ahead of us. He talked about pipeline gas and why are we not thinking about pipeline gas. He talked about the timing is right to invest, to transform, and he says never do you have.
Good morning, friends. Dr. Panagaria, Vice Chairman, Niti Aayog. Sri Amitabh Kant, CEO, Niti Aayog. Mr. Jason, Founding Director, Center of Global Energy Policy, Columbia University. Mr. Shashi Mukundan, distinguished guests, friends from media, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome all the participants to today's deliberation on natural gas. As you must be aware, this winter, Delhi's air quality has been in news of wrong regions. Alarm bells have been ringing in the worsening level of air pollution in the city. Friends, the pollution situation here is contributed by several factors, including burning of corpse stubbles in the fields of the organic states, diesel vehicles plying in the roads of Delhi, coal waste thermal plant of the edges of Delhi, construction dust, so and so forth. Almost 2 decades ago, when the pollution levels started rising of critical levels, the Supreme Court of India mandated use of CNG in commercial vehicles in Delhi. During the recent event, the coal-based power plant in NCR region was shut down for the few days. While such steps help in lowering the level of pollution in the short term, much more is needed to be done to address the long-standing problem in a sustainable manner. India faces dual challenges of greenhouse gases as well as local pollution like in Delhi and other cities in India. Further, climate change is real and its adverse impact hits the poor countries the hardest, even though they are not the primary polluters. We are determined to find a long-term solution to tackle both. In COP21, India demonstrated its commitment to reduce emissions intensity to combat climate change. On 2nd October 2016, on the occasion of the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, India ratified the Paris Agreement. Honorable Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi said that he chose Gandhiji's birthday as he gave an example of how to live with a low carbon footprint. India has committed to improve its carbon footprint and while improving standards of living by providing universal access to energy. We are committed to reducing emission intensity by 35% by 2030 compared with the 2005 levels. We plan to have 175 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2022. India's third commitment is to increase the forest cover of the country and absorb 2.5 to 3 gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere. This means creating another 5 million hectares of forest and improving the quality of another 5 million hectares of forests. We have realized that one of the things that would positively contribute to our commitment to COP21 is increased share of natural gas within the fossil fuel supply basket. As of now, India's gas uptake is about 6% of its primary energy basket against a global average of more than 24%. Under the leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister, Gujarat went on to become role model for natural gas with 26% share in its energy mix. We are determined to increase the gas uptake significantly as it would serve several objectives. By switching to this cleaner fuel and diversifying our energy mix, we can augment our fight towards climate justice. Secondly, we can substitute liquid fuels with natural gas in several applications. This will help us in our objective of reducing our import dependency from crude oil by 10% from the current levels by 2022 as articulated by Honorable Prime Minister. I recently chaired the Parliamentary Consultative Committee on PNG, where we deliberated on promoting gas economy. In this direction, we are doing the followings. On the supply side, we are working to increase the availability of natural gas in India by boosting domestic gas output, import LNG, and through transnational gas pipelines. We are improving gas infrastructure, including gas pipelines, city gas network, and LNG import infrastructure. We are looking to increase consumption of gas in various segments of economy. I will briefly touch upon each of these. Unprecedented shale gas boom in the USA, conventional gas finds elsewhere, and expansion of LNG trades have contributed to the gas supply prospects globally. As per projections, global gas production is expected to increase from 3.3 trillion cubic meters in 2010 to 5.1 trillion cubic meters by 2035. IEA has called it the golden age of gas. As natural gas is fast becoming a global commodity like oil, with increasing share of LNG. As in January 2016, the world had liquefaction capacity of more than 300 million metric tons per year, and by estimate, almost 900 million ton additional liquefaction terminals have been announced. The world would have liquefaction capacity of 450 MTPA, making an almost 50% increase in available supply of natural gas by 2020. Supply dynamics are changing in the global market. The US and Australia are going to play a major role in shaping the supply dynamics in the near term. US, which has world's second largest regasification facility today, has turned exporter of gas due to ample availability of shale gas. The LNG contracting mechanism are also seeing a change, with short-term contracts growing and replacing long-term contracts. Short-term and medium-term contracts, which were not even 10% by volume in 2000, have increased to cover almost 30% today. We have also successfully renegotiated our long-term contract with RasGas, Qatar, to benefit from the lower LNG price available globally. Oil-based contracts are getting replaced by gas-on-gas contracts. Our domestic pricing is also now gas-on-gas based. Indian companies have also signed gas-on-gas based contracts with US counterparts based on the Henry Hub prices. There will be innovation in the gas market with changing price dynamics such as swaps. Today, a vast majority of India's long-term LNG volumes comes from Qatar. Going forward, this is going with India's import LNG supplies from other major exporting countries like US, Russia, and Australia. We are now expediting production of gas from domestic source to extend up 20 trillion cubic feet from already discovered source through policy, fiscal and regulatory mechanism. These fields and the current auction of discovered small fields are going to add the domestic supplies in the next 3 to 4 years. Overall, we believe there will be plenty of supply natural gas at reasonable price for next few decades. Global experts present here in this meeting can enlighten us if this understanding is correct or not. 6able chunk of gas infrastructure was developed in the last decade, assuming a large domestic supply coming from the east coast. This did not happen. Now we are realigning the infrastructure planning given the role of LNG going to play in our supply mix. The north and western region in India consumes around 80% of overall volume of gas utilized in the country. We are working to change it and make eastern and southern India the new growth center. We are also expanding capacity in the existing terminals. Around 34 million ton MTPA of additional LNG regasification capacity is being pursued by various agencies. We are also developing corresponding pipelines. Overall, our existing network, which we also call as the national gas grid, will be doubled to about 30,000 kilometers in next 5 years. To ensure availability of gas in southern and eastern region, we are aggressively pursuing development of terminals along the eastern coast. In eastern India, GAIL has been given the responsibility to implement 2,500 kilometer Jagdishpur-Haldia and Bokaro-Dhamra pipeline, having an overall budget around 13,000 crore, with central government making a budgetary support of 40%. We call this the Pradhan Mantri Urja Ganga, since we believe that this pipeline will lead to accelerate economic growth of the eastern region. Commissioning this pipeline will lead to investment of about 8 billion, which includes revival of 3 large fertilizer units in the eastern region, industrialization of above 20 cities, and city gas development in 7 towns. Some other cross-country gas pipelines are under various stages of development. This will help complete the national gas grid by connecting locations which do not figure on the country's gas map as of now. Surat-Paradip pipeline, Mallabharam-Bhopal, Bhilwara-Bijapur pipeline, Mehsana-Bhatinda-Jammu-Srinagar pipeline are the prominent ones among them. We are hopeful that we will be able to take natural gas to most areas of the country within the next 5 to 7 years. We are also pursuing transnational pipelines projects. India is an active participant in the development of Tapi pipeline. A 1,300 kilometer Suez undersea gas pipeline is bring natural gas from Iran to India is also being studied. This transnational gas pipelines projects, we believe, will greatly help India in diversifying its natural gas pipe supplies. Currently, India consumes around 120 mmCMD of gas, of which 60% is consumed by the power and fertilizer sectors. With all our policy initiatives, planned infrastructure investments, and global fall in gas price, we expect the gas consumption to double in India in next 5 years to 240 mmCMD. We have the target to provide piped natural gas to all large cities of the country. Government plans to connect 10 million households to PNG network in the next 3 years. 35 new cities has been approved for CGD in last 2 years. We have already provided highest priority of domestic gas to the CGD network. Ministry of Urban Development has declared PNG as public utility to ensure faster development, and this will be an integrated part of smart cities. The annual consumption of urea in the country is approximately 320 lakhs metric ton, out of which 245 lakhs metric ton is produced in India and the rest is imported. To enhance the production of urea indigenously, government has approved the revival of Talcher, Ramagundam unit of FCI by PSUs. In July this year, government approved a revival of 3 more defunct fertilizer plants in Gorakhpur, Sindri and Barauni at the investment of 18,000 crore. These revived units will meet the growing demand of urea in the state of Orissa, Bihar, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh and Jharkhand. Uses of LNG and promotion of energy efficiency has helped increase domestic production of urea in the country, which in turn would reduce the government's subsidy burden. The pooling of domestic gas with the imported LNG is presently limited to the power and fertilizer sector. There is a school of thought to pool all the domestic gas with imported LNG for having a transition to comprehensive across the industry and pooling mechanism. We can have an academic discussion on this proposition. To begin with, I would welcome your views on this subject. Coming to the power sector, India has almost 24 gigawatt of gas-based capacity. When our government come into power in May 2014, almost 14 gigawatt of gas-based power was ideal and 10 gigawatt was operating in PLF of less than 35%. To improve this, our government has started gas pooling mechanism, which has increased LNG consumption in power sector from the level of 3 MMCMD during April 2015 prior to pooling of a maximum level of 11.47 MMCMD during March 2016. With the LNG prices expected to be lower in near future, we expect gas utilization in power sector to improve significantly. As you are aware, India is committed to build 175 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity by 2022, out of which 100 gigawatt will be solar power. Gas-based power plants that can ramp up and down in less time would act as an excellent complement on base power of these renewable capacities. Our government is determined to increase use of CNG and introduce use of LNG in the transport sector. CNG in vehicles is the key demand drive from most cities in India. With the current level of pollution, we are encouraging more vehicles to be converted to CNG. In Mumbai, CNG run vehicles have doubled in the last 3 years. We are also encouraging public transportation buses to run CNG. We are identifying green highways where we may connect neighboring cities through CNG dispensing stations. Our Ministry of Road Transport and Highways has released draft notification for the use of LNG as an automotive fuel. Final notification is expected to be released soon. Earlier this month, we entered into a new era of gas-based transportation when we rolled out LNG fuel bus in Kerala for the first time in the country. We also evaluating use of LNG in coastal shipping and railways. These LNG highways will be highways of future connecting major economic hubs with LNG fuel vehicles. Overall, it would not be far-fetched to imagine that in future, 25% of transportation fuel requirement can be made from CNG and LNG. Currently, India has 23 refineries operating with an installed capacity of 230 MTPA, which currently uses naphtha and FO as primary fuels. Given the price parity between naphtha and LNG, it makes an ideal case of shift to cleaner LNG as a process fuel. We are aggressively augmenting our refinery capacity. We have also decided to establish petrochemical shops in and around refineries, generating 10 million jobs and increase usage of gas. Thus, the role of gas in refineries and petrochemicals is expected to increase in future. Currently, very few industries use natural gas. With improved gas pipelines infrastructure, natural gas will be available more freely to all the industries. We also plan to gradually replace the furnace oil used in the industries to reduce pollution caused by furnace oils. So friends, I wanted to tell you that doubling of gas consumption from 120 MMCMD to 240 MMCMD in the next 5 years as a basic, and we are taking huge number of policy initiatives to make this happen. I am regularly having deliberation with my colleagues, ministries from power, fertilizer, surface transport, chemical and petrochemical, urban development to see what more can be done to increase use of gas in very possible segments of the economy. We also have to change the collective conscience and public perception about natural gas. In this direction, we have recently launched an initiative called Gas for India in collaboration with industries bodies like CII, Petrofed and Natural Gas Society. To sum up, natural gas is a natural choice for green economy. When I saw the topic of deliberation as India and natural gas, the joining together of plentiful supply with promising demand, one Hindi term come to my mind, मौका है, मौका भी है और दस्तूर भी gas-based economy in India has never closer to reality than it is today. It calls for concentrated efforts on the part of all stakeholders. Let us make it happen. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Minister. Like I told you, thank you for, going through and setting the stage for us by talking about the global gas situation, what's happening around the globe, and then, coming down to India, talking about India's aspiration, and then all the various policy initiatives. As you can see, there's no one single sector that the minister left out in terms of what we're trying to do and, what India is trying to do. It's quite a comprehensive thing, so it's not just an academic exercise. It's actually a work in progress as we're going through. Minister needs to leave at 10:30, so I'm going to quickly turn it over to my co-host Jason to do something different, which is a conversation with the minister and the vice chairman. So over to you, Jason.
Thank you. 8 minutes to explore all the details of India's gas market. We have plenty of time. That was a great overview of so many issues related to the market, so I guess maybe I'll just ask you to expand a little bit on one or two of those. And first on this, the title, Plentiful Supply. So can you say a little bit more about where the supply is going to come from? What do you see as the potential for domestic production onshore? What do you see as the potential for offshore or unconventional like coal bed methane? And what are the main obstacles at the moment? What can the government do to help promote that domestic production?
Yasan Shashi is a major stakeholder of our gas production. It's a very good thing to hear from a stakeholder how the present government has unfolded so many reforms, primarily to augment the domestic gas production. I can cite 2 examples. We have deregulated the pricing mechanism. Yes, Mr. Amitabh Kant, on his deliberation, he rightly said, if we look into if 2004 is the first LNG cargo to India, and today we are in 2016, why there is no so progress, and what are the new way? Yes, we little bit delayed our whole plan due to some communication gap, I can say. Past thing is past thing. And today, in Indian market, there was huge debate going on last few years on the pricing mechanism. Who will decide the price? That's the basic key. Basic issue, according to my understanding, that create a huge bottleneck for the gas-based market. It was there in the PSC. It should be market driven, but based wisdom to the then government, they took it in their own hand. This government, the first policy statement we could do, we have deregulated, we have created a market mechanism. What will be the gas price? That's the biggest policy statement we could do. That creates a new gateway. What exactly happening in the field, if I can cite, in last 10 days, I met 3 important business persons, those who are into gas production infrastructure. I met Mr. Jeff, global head of G. Yesterday I met 2 CEO of McDermott and head of the G oil and gas business. They are here to explore the possibility of future production facility. We are visualizing around $20 billion worth of investment in next 5 to 7 years, primarily on deep water gas production. So this kind of positive vibrations are there to augment our gas production. I have cited in my speech, recently we had a small bidding round for the discovered small fields. The kind of participation are there. We know there is a challenging price regime in the world today. With that challenging scenario also, lot of enthusiasm are there for the bidders. So our primary source will be to augment our production. We have created policy clarity. Simultaneously, we are augmenting our, we don't want to miss the low LNG price in the world market. We are augmenting our existing regasification capacity. We are heavily investing on new regasification capacity. We are creating some anchor customer network. We are investing for the first time. For the first time in the Indian gas industry, Government of India is investing from its treasury to create gas pipeline. We are very committed to create a new gas-based economy. Government is focused to augment the domestic production, to bring quality LNG from the world market, and to create a local market, and to enable all such things, invest in infrastructure. These are the primary statement, primary policy by government.
You mentioned the infrastructure, so one of the challenges is in boosting gas usage is investment in new infrastructure, the build out of new pipelines. So can you just say more about what's the role for government versus the private sector in financing those projects? Are there any lessons from Gujarat, where a province that's seen quite a bit of use of natural gas, that's relevant to how people should approach it in other areas?
Right, Mr. Jason. When I last 2.5 years, I have studied what is the key of the Gujarat. Rightly, at one point I could realize infrastructure on gas sector is the key for the mass consumption. Gujarat is taking advantage of that. Historically, Gujarat government, due to visionary leadership of Prime Minister Modi when he was the Chief Minister, and historically Gujarat has some terminals, has some pipelines, and Prime Minister Modi accelerated that. That is the primary reason the gas consumption is up to 26% in their energy mix. We want to recreate that in the eastern part of the India. We are putting 2 terminals, one at Dhamra, one at Kakinada, and another proposed terminal will be somewhere in the Haldi area, in the deep sea. In the eastern coast, we are putting some terminals. Now, as I quoted you, 500 kilometers of huge pipeline from the central India to east coast. That will create a network between five eastern states. Eastern Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal and Odisha. That pipeline will create a link to Bangladesh. We are talking to Bangladesh. There is a pipeline proposed to be laying up to border of Bangladesh, and we are talking to our neighboring friend Bangladesh to create a grid in between Bangladesh, and that pipeline will go up to northeast area of the India. So whole eastern India. What is eastern India? Eastern India is full of minerals. There is second green revolution is going on in eastern India. We need fertilizer there. Yes, there is a coal-based area, but we want to mix that as we are committed to COP21. There are 220 major industrial clusters in the eastern India. In a new scheme, Pradhan Mantri, Ganga is an important lifeline of India. We want to create a gas-based riverine. We coined that scheme Prime Minister's Energy River. Pradhan Mantri Urja Ganga. That's a flagship program of this government. We want to invest from government. Leading company like GAIL are there. We are unfolding CGD. We're reviving the closed down fertilizer plants. We'll create a new economy infrastructure model in that area.
You mentioned COP21 a few times, and I'm wondering how important the global climate negotiation process is for increasing the focus on using more natural gas here, and if you have thoughts about whether a new administration in the United States is going to be much less inclined to participate constructively in the Paris process, what impact that might have.
Yes, and I can tell about my strategy. My Prime Minister is very committed. When we are committed ourselves proactively in Paris, we are knowing what will be happening in the global scenario. We are not in isolation. We know what can be happen. But we are, as a responsible civilization, I can say, and my Prime Minister is a strong believer of world responsibility. This responsibility from our side is not only for India, it is for world community. And we will be continuing to participate what we have committed. And as you said, the whole understanding last 2.5 years, the whole understanding. Today I read a news There is a huge rift in OPEC. The Excellency Janghe, Honorable Oil Minister of Iran, has made a great statement. The will of Iran is to produce more oil. It sounds good music in my ear. When there will be more production in the GCC belt, I will be the luckiest person. I will be the happiest person. It may hurt somebody's economy, but it suits me. The whole geopolitics is changing very fast from America to GCC area to Australia. So India is a huge consumer. Now I am the third consumer in the world. All the experts are saying my incremental energy requirement will be at India. So time is coming. India will lead, India will guide, not COP21. Our energy requirement will create a new model, will create new normals from India-centric one.
Well, even if Iran decides to join in a production cut and raise the price, I think the U.S. is going to respond pretty quickly with the shale, with what's happened in shale supply. So that may be music to your ears too.
So I say the new normals of geopolitics, due to changing geopolitics, there will be a new normal. There is a new normal. So it's now it suits consuming like country like us.
I have a lot more questions I'd want to ask, but I don't want to make you late. I know you have to go at 10:30, so should we wrap up there? I didn't want to ignore. I thought we could maybe ask if you talk a little bit further afterwards, but I don't know if we have more time. But
thank you.
Okay,
if
thank
I
you.
be permitted to attend the parliament. Thank you, friends.
Thank you. I wasn't trying to ignore you, Dr. Panagaria, but I knew we only had 8 minutes with the minister. So, is there anything you would want to comment on about the pricing structure for natural gas? I mean, India uses a much smaller share of natural gas in its energy mix, just 6 or 7% of the total energy mix, as compared to, I think it's around 24% is the average around the world. So, if there is a desire to increase the demand for gas, it sounds like that is a goal of the government. What are the key policy tools to do it? How important is maybe additional pricing reform or other actions?
Well, let me just say that economists are very daunted by the economics of energy. It's a very complex field for economists to deal with, and no wonder very few actually work in this area, because this really involves large players. On both sides, I mean, at least parts of it. The ultimate consumers are very many, but on the purchase side, electricity, discoms, only a few players. Generation side, few players. Lots of different substitutes of energy, and also it's a bit of a daunting field. So as that is a background for saying that I have no knowledge of this field. But first, actually, what I wanted to do was to thank you very much for joining us. I'd been in touch with Jason for quite a while to organize this event, and we did almost did it a couple of times earlier, but it fell through. So finally, I'm absolutely delighted that you're here, and your team is bigger today than it would have been on the earlier dates. So it's absolutely fabulous that we are able to collaborate with you. I want to thank all your team players over here as well. Also, Minister has left, but I think, a great admiration for the Minister. Last, actually, I saw him, he turned to me and said, you all from Niti Aayog are writing this national energy policy, but I've already done 60% of what you have in that policy, so this is going to be 2040. What more do you want me to do? So it really is a very dynamic minister, and I know that when I came in January 2015 here, the exploration particularly was in serious doldrums, and a lot of the players in the industry had come and seen me, some of whom probably are in the audience here, and I think, within the last year, truly very truly major actions have been taken by the ministry and the minister, and as a result, huge excitement and expectations, of course, also for huge investments by the industry. So that really is a very welcome change in the sector. Now, going to the question itself, really, just some very dramatic figures. The share of gas in energy consumption worldwide, I'm told, is about 24% on average. In India, it's a 6%. So really, there's no theorem in economics, probably even in energy economics, which says that this ratio has to be the same around the world, but certainly 6% relative to 24% seems extremely low. So I think scope is huge. On the demand side, today, for example, about 250 to 300 million Indians have no access to electricity. About twice as many actually do not have access to clean cooking fuel. So scope for the expansion of demand all around is huge. It has also turned out, actually, the experience for a minute from the cooking fuel, that in effect, the alternatives that have been tried, there are these special stoves which try to contain the black carbon and all, just hasn't spread. I mean, not even 1% of the households have adopted these things after about 15 to 20 years of effort. In the end, I think gas will have to be the solution. And one way I think we ought to do is, wherever we got high density of population, bring in piped LNG and take the LPG, which is transported using the cylinders, to the more interior kind of areas. So that will be one way, actually, that you both create more infrastructure for the dense areas in terms of the actual pipelines going all the way to the households, and at the same time you actually increase the demand for gas. Also, given the COP21 is being mentioned continuously, but also given India's index, we would need to actually shift to substantial degree to gas. And that is going to happen probably at two different levels. One, to some degree, replacement of coal, particularly where the generation plants are nearer the populations, then you really need to go with gas rather than coal. But also, the Prime Minister has huge emphasis on clean energy and solar, therefore. And if you are going to really expand that, I mean, this is a huge, we're talking about, by 2022, 175 gigawatt capacity. At that level, it seems to me that this will have to be done through the grid. Solar energy will have to be connected to the grid. And that, of course, means for balancing, you would need an alternative source which you can easily, start and stop. And that has to be gas. So I think, in principle, there are plenty of sources of demand that are there for gas. If anything, actually, I would think that is the sources of supply. But then the sources of supply it didn't get mentioned, but there is a very substantial amount of import that's going to happen from the United States. So India has contracted, starting from 2018, for something like 10 BCM of import of LNG from the United States. So there are discussions, actually. I had that committee on how should we really transport that. Should we start building our own ships? And there again, it goes to the link I was talking about earlier, that it is a very complex sector. So there's a big debate going on here whether India should start building its own ships, or we should simply, because such a large amount of gas, LNG, is going to be imported, or we should simply lease these ships. So,
It's a good transition because I think I'm supposed to talk a little bit next in my talk about what's happening in U.S. LNG and what that supply might look like and what prices it might come in. But I'm just curious, as a quick follow-up question, as an economist, how you think about issues of security of supply, and if you grow dependence on imported gas, and we've seen gas prices around the world range from $4 or $5 to $18 or $20 in the last couple of years. What do you think? Does that raise concerns, or how do you think about the economic potential consequences of connecting more to imported gas that might have a lot of price volatility?
yeah, it's we talk often when we talk of energy security, our usual definition is the import dependence, and so we almost think of the two as being synonymous. I think there is another way one can also talk about energy security, which is in terms of access to energy, right? And that gives you a very different interpretation. I mean, in today's world where you could actually diversify your imports as well, if you got multiple sources of supply. And here you got multiple sources of energy and you got multiple sources of supply of each of these forms of energy. In effect, you can actually, even as an importer, you can have substantial energy security. And in any case, in India, we have imported very vast amounts of oil. We have been dependent actually very, very substantially on oil imports. If anything, a lot of the balance of payments or current account deficit issues that India has confronted at different times have often had their origins in actually the oil imports. But, the country has risen to the occasion by being able to export other things, generate the necessary foreign exchange that's required to import oil. And so I think there is something to this to be said that import dependence can have an adverse impact on energy security, but at the same time, if getting energy to the poor on a regular basis at a reasonable price is also a goal, then I think imports do play a critical role in that. And given India's need actually to start switching towards greater consumption of gas, at least get some better balance, both from the viewpoint of the mix, but also from the viewpoint of absorbing more solar energy, as well as from the viewpoint of shifting away from coal. I think if, in the short run at least, if we rely on some imports, that's quite okay.
Can I ask a question? Sure. Dr. Banerjee, I've got a suggestion, and then I want to kind of get your thoughts on whether this would work. I think one of the things we keep talking about is the fact that there isn't enough infrastructure in place in India. And, there's always a chicken and egg, right? If you have the infrastructure, then gas will come, and somebody will say, if you have the gas, then the infrastructure will come. So the thought I had was, why is there a way we can, for example, mandate, as people are building highways and roads and smart cities, can we mandate as part of that putting in two things? One is a gas pipeline, digging an extra trench to put in the pipeline in there. And if you start building that, then you can connect it. And your roads are anyway going from cities to cities, so you're connecting cities. Another out-of-the-box thinking is, why can't we use the railway right-of-ways to put in gas pipelines and fiber optic cables for communication? Again, here what happens is that it's touching every small town, and every station becomes a town where you can have reticulation systems. And if you do it as part of a larger program, it also is incremental cost, right? So if it's a guy building a road, it's a small increment for that person to put a pipeline, rather than saying, now you go build a 2,500 kilometer pipeline. Just a thought.
No, absolutely. Good suggestion. Certainly the infrastructure needs to be built up in a big way in this country, in all areas, transportation, digital, gas.
Like smart cities, right? I mean, you can mandate rooftop solar, you can mandate piped gas.
Well, so mandates then really bypass the market a bit. And as a private operator, I'm surprised that you believe in mandates rather than the markets.
No, I'm thinking of, for example, when you have large townships built in the U.S., right? As part of that, the builder has to make sure.
I think you have to. The technology has to be of a proper incentive. Otherwise, mandates can also. One has to think through. I'm not totally against the mandates. Certainly, where necessary, we should do mandates as well. But if the mandates are, or if the costs are completely out of line with the mandates, I think that doesn't make for a good mandate.
I think it's fair to say most economists have a little bit of an instinctive aversion to mandates.
Well, no, it's not averse, but it's more proper incentive. People who are being mandated to do certain things, because they'll not maintain these things then, you see. Again, like water harvesting. If you do it in areas where the feasibility of creating such water harvesting avenues is limited, then people will then try to get around those mandates in costly ways. So that's all I'm saying. It's not that we shouldn't have, of course, where necessary we'll have mandates, and we do have mandates. It's not that. But one has to see whether the mandate, if the mandate is too far from what would be cost effective, then I think you are taking a risk.
I think I have some slides. I don't know what it takes to put them up. But.
So Jason's going to sum up this session by giving some of his thoughts around gas and where we are going, and, kind of set the stage for the rest of the 3 sessions that we're going to have.
I control it from here. Okay. So I was asked to just say a few words about what the outlook for one of those potential sources of natural gas supply is, which is what's happening in the United States on the supply side, what's happening with shale gas production, and what's happening and is going to happen with natural gas exports. I'll try to move forward somewhat quickly. And I'll say a word or two also about what I think the election of Donald Trump may mean as president for energy and environment policy, because I think perhaps there may be some interest in that. Everybody knows we've had a stunning revolution in natural gas production in the United States. The scale and magnitude of the increase that we've seen in shale gas is really quite remarkable. Everybody knows that, but it still is helpful, I think, sometimes to look at pictures that remind you just how stunning the turnaround has been in the energy picture in the United States. And so what you see here on the left are the projections from the U.S. Department of Energy from 2005 for United States natural gas import needs. And you can see the projections were that year after year we would import a growing volume of costly liquefied natural gas. And on the right, you have the most recent projections from the U.S. Department of Energy for U.S. natural gas imports, which now are a mirror image of what we thought would be true a decade ago. And now the U.S. is poised to increasingly export gas linked to a very low price of Henry Hub, which I think is going to stay pretty low for a long time. And the U.S. is poised to become one of the largest exporters of LNG in the world. So we all know how big the scale and magnitude of the global energy system is. Things change slowly, not quickly. For this to have happened in a decade is really a stunning turnaround in the U.S. natural gas picture, the U.S. energy picture. There's a lot of uncertainty about exactly what the cost curve for U.S. natural gas looks like. I took one from IHS, one of the leading consulting firms, but I think the more evidence we get and the more experience we have with shale gas, the more reason there is to think something like this is probably right, which is a pretty flat supply curve with an enormous amount of gas that can be extracted profitably in the $3 to $4 range, if not more cheaply, which is where Henry Hub is today. So we have a lot of cheap gas in the U.S. That's the takeaway from that slide. The biggest contributor to that by far has been the Marcellus Shale formation in Pennsylvania and other states neighboring it, which is just one of the world's most prolific natural gas plays in the world. It's really quite stunning what the Marcellus has been able to do. We have had quite a seismic event in our political system in the U.S., and I think it took everyone by surprise, including the president-elect. And so I think it's going to take a little bit of time to really understand what it's going to mean for energy and environment policy and how much some of the rhetoric we heard during the campaign actually turns into real policy tools. But I will say that at a high level, we heard a lot of rhetoric from President-elect Trump during the campaign about American energy independence. He called his energy plan America First. He said things from time to time, like to the New York Times, he would consider banning the import of Saudi oil to the United States. Said he would cancel the Paris Climate Agreement, which he doesn't have the ability to do, but he could basically pull the U.S. out of active participation in it. So we have to, again, with a grain of salt, see how these things play out. But I will say it's relevant to the export discussion. There has been an isolationist tone to some of the rhetoric we've heard that I find a little bit worrisome, and we may see that certainly in trade agreements. There's a potential one may see it in energy trade as well. I don't think that's likely, but I think it's something to pay attention to. I don't have time to walk through all of these, but there are a host of issues that we will be paying close attention to in the United States about how Trump's administration might differ from that of Obama. The most important climate initiative that the President Obama took was the Clean Power Plan, which would reduce the use of coal in the power sector. I think the Clean Power Plan is probably finished now. Either because a 5-4 Supreme Court with an appointment by Trump reverses it, or because the Environmental Protection Agency just doesn't implement it actively. The President-elect Trump has promised to bring back the coal industry. That's not something I don't think he's actually able to do, but I think he could slow the decline of the coal industry by getting rid of the Clean Power Plan. I think we're going to get rid of various regulations for domestic shale production that are there to protect public health and the environment. I don't think that'll have a huge impact on shale production because we've already had a huge boom in shale production. I don't think government regulation has been the primary barrier to that. We're going to double fuel economy standards, and we have to see if President Trump would think differently about doing that. As I said, we've basically gotten to a point now where we've lifted the ban on oil exports. The Department of Energy is giving permits to exporters of natural gas that have commercially viable projects. That's not, government permitting is not the barrier to natural gas exports anymore. It's just market conditions. I don't think that will change, but it's something to pay attention to given the isolationist rhetoric. And then, as I said, the Paris Climate Agreement, I think the U.S. will just likely participate much less constructively and not take the same leadership role that had been done before. The president is likely to also open new areas to oil and gas drilling, but again, there's not a lot of market interest given the commercial conditions today in going into places like the Arctic. You can see here just as one example where I said he couldn't bring back coal. These are projections of what would happen to the U.S. energy mix with and without the Clean Power Plan, and you can see coal would decline more quickly with the Clean Power Plan than it would without, so it provides a little bit of a support to coal to get rid of that. I should note also that underlying all of this, and I think it's relevant as you think about the topic of natural gas and increasing India's use of natural gas, is how controversial natural gas is in the United States, how controversial shale is in the United States. And the idea that natural gas is a cleaner fuel, both from a climate perspective and from an air pollution perspective, is one that is embraced by a lot of people, but not everyone. And that controversy over gas and the role of gas in a deeply decarbonized economy, that conflict is getting more intense, not less. And if you look on the right there, every year Pew polls the American public to say, do you support fracking? And the percentage of people who oppose it went up last year rather than the other direction. And the biggest change was actually among Republicans. So this is not a partisan issue. So I think that's important for people in industry. We have many of them here today to sort of, again, it's different context here, but certainly in the U.S., that industry has an important role to play in building public trust and confidence that when you're producing shale gas in the U.S., you're doing it in the most responsible way. What does all of this that's happening in the U.S. mean for the global gas market? Well, as I said, the United States, along with Australia, is going to increase global LNG supplies by somewhere around 40-50% over through 2020. So we have an enormous amount of new gas supply coming into the U.S. market, almost all of which coming from the U.S. and Australia. We have 5 projects in the U.S. that are underway, have taken FID, have commercial contracts, and are likely, I think, likely to be developed, notwithstanding the changes that we've seen in the global gas market. And that brings total U.S. exports of natural gas by 2019 or so to around 8 or 9 BCF a day, making the U.S. one of the largest suppliers of natural gas in the world. Now, I think that, I don't know why the numbers didn't show up here. Sorry about that. It says value. The purpose of this slide was a study that we just put out. I think there may be copies of it outside, asking the question of if we build all of this natural gas export capacity, is the world going to want it? Because when we started this process, the price of gas in Asia was $18 or $20, and obviously the global gas market looks very different today. So we did a paper recently that looked at, did scenario analysis to look at the range of projected factors that would drive the price of natural gas, from obviously the price of Henry Hub to fuel costs and vessel charter costs and regasification costs, and trying to show how likely it would be that U.S. gas would be in the money or not. And I think what we found was that it was a much smaller arbitrage window, and at various points, as we saw around a month or two ago in Europe, that arbitrage window can close completely. But for the most part, it still is likely that U.S. gas will be economic and that arbitrage window will be open, although it might close for periods of time. This is all looked at on a marginal cost basis. So we have assumed that the tolling fee, the liquefaction cost, is a sunk cost. That's the structure of the contracts that many of these exporters have, for example, Cheniere with Gale. And so when you assume that the tolling fee is a sunk cost, you're just looking at a marginal cost basis of a Henry Hub plus the cost of transport and regasification. I think that's the right way to look at it, but I know there have been some questions raised about whether some of those buyers might try to renegotiate those contract terms. I think that would probably not be taking a long-term view of this, how the gas market is going to change in the long term, the potential for the market to tighten up considerably in the early 2020s, the concerns about reputation risk and credibility risk. I think it would not, in my view, be a smart move to try to force a renegotiation of those things, especially when the nature of the contracts is not actually selling a landed price of gas, but just selling a liquefaction service. That's what the tolling fee is, and when global gas prices are very expensive, the buyer of the gas makes out very well, but the buyer of the gas is also taking a little bit of risk that the market conditions might change. I think I've written a lot for a long time about what U.S. gas exports into the global market may mean, and I think it's quite transformational. The ability of natural gas with flexibility on its destination clauses, indexed to a Henry Hub spot price, is creating more competition in the global market, creating more optionality and diversity of supply, putting a lot of pressure on the long-term oil link structure that we've seen for natural gas prices for quite a while, and essentially can play a role, especially if there's flexibility and any excess capacity at all in those U.S. volumes, to set a sort of soft cap on the price for gas that we may see in various markets around the world. So trying to create a more efficient, well-functioning global gas market where the price of gas is determined by supply and demand for that commodity. We're starting to see a shift toward more toward more gas-on-gas competition determining the price of gas around the world. We've seen that certainly in Europe and increasingly in Asia, and I think U.S. natural gas plays a pretty important role in continuing that shift and that transformation. This is what we've seen happen to the prices of natural gas around the world, as you all know, come for a variety of reasons, including the oil price collapse, but also this increased volumes, the glut we're seeing potentially in the market for at least the near to medium term. A lot more competition in the market has collapsed global gas prices. We've seen European gas prices fall considerably, Asian gas prices fall considerably, and so there's a lot of much cheaper gas supply in the global market than there was before. And this is important, I think, not only for economic reasons, because it provides a cheaper source of gas supply for importing countries like India, but I think also has very important geopolitical, foreign policy, and national security implications. And this is what I spent my time in government at the White House National Security Council thinking about. But the the concerns that many gas importers have, certainly, for example, in Europe with Russia, about dependence on a single source of supply and the geopolitical risks that that entail, those start to look very different when you have diversity of supply and optionality in the global market. When Lithuania, for example, which is the picture you see here on the right, can build a floating import terminal called the Independence, and even before a molecule of gas goes through it, can negotiate a 25% discount off its gas bill from Gazprom just because it has new competition now and you actually need to compete in a market. I think this has very important implications for diplomatic and foreign policy relationships around the world. And we've seen that in where the U.S. gas has gone today. When these projects were started, many people thought this supply would go to Asia because the gas price was $18 or $20. We've seen, in reality, two-thirds of the U.S. gas exports to date have gone to Latin America. I think this is important because what it tells you is that, and some of the 4 cargoes have gone to India, what it tells you is that markets, rather than geopolitics or any other top-down government decision, are determining where those gas supplies go. And that lets markets work more efficiently, as I said before. India is going to emerge as a major source of that potential increase in global LNG supply. It's already one of the world's largest LNG importers, and the projections are that imports of LNG, as we heard this morning from the minister, to India will continue to rise moving forward, and the potential demand growth there, I think, is really quite significant. Again, my apologies, I don't know why the numbers didn't turn out here. It just says value. But depending on the policy measures put in place, whether the infrastructure to the new import terminals can be built, as we talked about this morning, if a lot of those steps are taken to build out that infrastructure and invest in sources of demand, power generation, downstream production like petrochem and fertilizer and other things, the potential for the volumes of gas that could come in here, when you look at what people assume for a high case rather than a base case, is really quite significant. And one thing that I would just note that is also changing the way the global gas market thinks about the cost of importing gas are a lot of dramatic cost reductions we've seen in import costs because of some of the changes we've seen in the cost of floating FSRUs, floating storage and regasification units, which makes the potential for reliance on imports much more economic. And as I just started with this morning, again, you sort of, when I opened my curtains in the hotel here this morning and couldn't really see anything, it was a reminder that natural gas, which tends to get talked about, certainly in the U.S., from a carbon standpoint, how to deal with methane emissions, which is important, how to make sure that it's actually a better solution than coal from a climate change standpoint. But we all know that it is vastly lower in local pollutants than coal, and for areas of the world that are struggling with severe local pollution problems, natural gas has a lot of potential benefit. So thank you again for joining us today, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the first session, the inaugural session. A big thank you to Dr. Panagaria to be here and be part of the inaugural session. Sir, thank you for coming here. And I think we're going to be taking a break till 11:30 when we will have the first session. So thank you.